Somebody said hello back there. All right, if you could just come as close as possible, just for the dynamics and for you to have some visibility. There are seats here, some around. All right, so good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome our speaker this evening, Dr. Ospino, who will be delivering our Anthony Jordan lecture today. As you can imagine, he arrived into this snowy chaos. And so initially when I reached out and I asked him if he could come here, I was hesitating, will he want to come? Because our last speaker, Timothy Batuvina, with whom he works very closely sometimes, when he agreed, he didn't know that I wasn't at McGill anymore. And so he was all ready for a vacation with his wife. We're going to Montreal. We love Montreal, and a few weeks before he was like, where could we stay in Montreal? I was like, I'm not in Montreal anymore, I'm in Edmonton. He was like, oh. And then he asked me, what is there to do in Edmonton? I was like, there's a river, there's a mountain. It's nice out here. Yes. Right. So in the end, I was actually afraid. I was like, if you don't want to come anymore, that's okay. I understand. It's a long way and so on. Anyway, he ended up coming, as you know. So at least this time around, you'll be a good ambassador of Edmonton, and you'll say it's full of adventure and snow. So I'm very grateful, doubly grateful. Thank you so much for being here with us today. He started stuck in the parking lot, so there was more action in getting the car from here to the entrance than there was from getting him from Boston to here. So thank you, doubly thank you. All right, Dr. Ospino is a native of Colombia, where he pursued undergraduate studies in philosophy. He holds an MA in theology with concentration in church history and a PhD in theology and education from Boston College. His research explores the dialogue between faith and culture and the impact of this interchange upon Catholic theological education, catechesis, and ministry. He has served as a principal investigator for several nationally recognized studies on how the Hispanic Catholic presence is transforming parishes, schools, and organizations. He has authored and edited more than a dozen books. He is a frequent speaker at national and international events. He is actively involved in ministry and faith formation projects in various parts of the United States. So without further delay, join me in welcoming Dr. Ospino.
Well, good evening, everyone. Pablo, gracias. Thank you for the invitation to be here and for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you on this important topic of the parish. As Pablo was indicating, I'm a pastoral theologian, and when we were preparing this for this lecture or this presentation, I asked Pablo, who is going to be in the audience? And because I need to be sure, if I want to be preparing a boring lecture or a presentation, what is it? Even for those of you who constantly are preparing lectures for your classrooms, do you want another lecture on a snowy day in the middle, at the end of March? So we agreed that what I will do today is I want to offer a series of thoughts and invite you into conversation, because we all have skin in the game when it comes to parish life. We live our faith in the context of faith communities. We practice our faith. We receive the experience of sacramental life in the context of parish life. Some of you have more experience about parish life than perhaps others. When we speak about Vatican II, some of you actually have lived this experience of parish life, and you have seen how parishes are being transformed, what's emerging, and so on. So my role today will be to offer a series of frameworks, and that's how I want to start the conversation today. I want to provide a series of frameworks that help us to understand what it means to be parish. And the first thing that we are going to do is I'm going to start with a question, and I'm going to invite you, just with the people at your tables, right at your table, to answer the following question. Let's see if I can get this. What does it mean for you to be parish? Pardon the typo here. What does it mean for you to be parish? You've got 2 minutes at your tables. Just share your initial thoughts.
I don't know, for me, this whole thing kind of closest church to where I live, so it's kind of a local church where you see your neighbors. That's the place.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think I really emphasize the communal aspect of the parish. So whether it's within the physical church building, doesn't have to be. Like it could be a parish barbecue, it could be a parish fundraiser, right? Those things sometimes happen outside of the parish, but it's really the people who you see.
Well, a place for the sacrifice. Like, right, I do, but I don't. But, well, I know a lot.
I worked in an architect,
But you said you like some are more crazy.
not at all. And parish, and I do give it a grant. It's one of the members of the body of Christ. So we as individuals are members of the body of Christ.
Do you know what I'm saying?
And so I like to encourage people not to, it's not a priest shop, not a parish hop, but it's sort of like your family. You don't get to choose what family you belong to. You don't get to choose what parish you belong to.
When I grew up, like my parents' house was sort of 5 minutes walk to my parish, so I've been always, like instinctively, whenever I look for a parish, I look for a church that is good with it. And I believe that there are some activities or sometimes it's just very difficult.
I guess like that was the case that maybe walking distance versus kind of and what instead of going to the places
We always say,
And I think that community happens outside of the church building, in addition to outside of the church building, right? So like, getting to know the people of that.
30 seconds.
Because I know when people just come to church, just come to mass on Sunday, that's all they do.
Yeah.
You never get to know or they don't really know.
Yeah.
So there's not that many activities in the parish, so that's the same thing. Outside the church.
Very good. So let's come back to the larger group, and then we'll have another couple of moments to go back to our colleagues on the table. So just briefly, in one sentence, let's hear 4 or 5 of you. What's a parish? In one sentence. Who wants to venture? Or what does it mean for you to be parish?
Our group said it was, in summary, a unified, lasting community of a local region.
Unified, lasting community in a particular region. Great. 2? Yes, sir?
Well, one of the things discussed at our table is a community of believers where you, by being a participant in the parish, kind of receive the support you need to grow in your faith, and you likewise are invested in the community that's with you to help people who go in your parish grow in their faith.
Fabulous. Community of believers, in which you are invested in your faith, and at the same time, others support you as you grow in that faith. Wonderful. 3?
So I focused a little bit in our conversation on the oddity of the question. What does it mean for you to be parish? Means that there's some sort of command for me to go be parish with my concentric circles of my family and the parish and then the diocese and then the universal church. And So somehow I'm supposed to do that in the intersecting layers of institutional church.
And thank you for picking up on the nuance of the question, because I didn't ask what does it mean for you to belong to a parish, or what does it mean for you to serve in a parish, but to be parish, you know. In a sense, you're absolutely right, you know. We bring whatever we are in the context of the faith community into all the different realms in which we exist and we live. Or one last person, someone else. I actually heard you say something very interesting. Please.
I mentioned the sacraments.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main
Community where we experience the sacraments. Okay. Liturgy certainly plays a central role, at least in the in our Catholic tradition. About we go to the parish because that is the place where the sacraments are regularly administered. Okay, so what is the parish? I think that before we speak about any evolution of the parish and what's happening today and so on, we need to understand what the parish is. And I want to just briefly walk you through two perspectives. One, canon law, which is the one perspective that actually defines what parishes are. For a bishop, bishops don't set up parishes or establish parishes out of whim. There's a reason why they do that. People don't go to parishes just simply because it's the only place where they can spend most of their lives or anything. There's a particular reason. Canon law helps us with that. Canon 515, entry 1 says, a parish is a certain community of the Christian faithful, stably constituted in a particular church, meaning the diocese, whose pastoral care is entrusted to a pastor, parocus, as its proper pastor under the authority of the diocesan bishop. Okay? So notice all these characteristics that are presupposed in the context of the parish. It is a community. It's a community that brings together the faithful. It is stably constituted, in the context of the diocese, entrusted to a pastor under the authority of a diocesan bishop. Okay, so in an ideal world, a parish will have all of the above. In a parish, we'll have all of the above. What we know is that in the last 50, 60 years, many parish communities actually need to manage to exist without some of these elements. For instance, many parishes that do not have a resident pastor. So they are administered either by lay people, or they are administered by vowed religious, or they have a pastor that somehow comes every now and then, and that is common in Latin America. You will find it in Africa. You will find it in the United States. You will find it in many parts of the world. There are parishes that are not stable, as a matter of fact, that are not communities that are permanent. So there are parishes that have communities that are constantly on the go, on the move, communities that are being transformed. For instance, parishes that are constituted by farm workers, parishes that are constituted by people by travelers on a regular basis, whose constituency may be one today, 6 months later, it may be an entire group totally different, So the question that we need to start asking in those cases, for instance, is, does the parish exist because there is a pastor, or does the parish exist because there is a community? And we would assume, again, all of the above, but not all the time they happen at the same time. What's the parish? From a theological perspective, we can say that the parish is, as the Code of Canon Law reminds us, an embodiment of the church at the local level. Okay? So, and that is a very important understanding of what the parish is. An embodiment of the church, of the faith community, the ecclesia, in the local level, at the local context. So there are no parishes that are universal. There are no parishes that are greater than the diocese. Parishes have always that particular character. But the beauty of it, no, and we actually, this was highlighted by the Second Vatican Council, that in the parish, in the context of the parish, the entire church is represented. Okay, the entire church is represented, and I'll get to that in a minute. 2, the parish is a space or is an experience where the church's communion is actualized. Okay, in the context of the parish, no. And right now I'm speaking about a space because traditionally we associate parishes with a territorial community, a community in a particular territory. So it's a space. But more and more, we're beginning to imagine the idea of parishes or parish communities existing within a territory and transcending the territory. And I will say a few more things about this. Why am I saying that? So space where the church's communion is actualized. Communion always, because in the context of the parish, the parish brings to life the experience of communion that the bishop has with the rest of the bishops and the Pope. Okay? So ultimately, being a pastor of a community, of a parish community, means being someone who effectuates communion on behalf of the bishop. Okay? Someone who effectuates communion on behalf of the bishop. And finally, going back to the concept of liturgy, a parish is a community that praises God, and it is constituted and renewed by God's grace through sacramental celebration, usually the liturgy. So it is in the community, the parish exists to celebrate. The parish exists to engage in that activity of the church that is ultimately geared towards praising God, and by praising God through the sacraments, through sacramental celebration, becoming sanctified. Why do we have parishes? We need parishes because this is the space where people receive that sacramental grace, where the call to holiness is once again actualized. So that gives us the 101 of what parish life is. You know, we all grew up in a sense with this understanding of parishes. You know, we always talk about my parish, your parish. You know, we know a Catholic person pretty much, you know, by knowing in what parish did you grow up. You know, that's kind of a common question that we would ask as Roman Catholics. The idea of parish today, in a sense, is taken for granted. You know, we all take the idea of parishes for granted. You belong to a parish, we are told, you know. As a matter of fact, if you are gonna get married, you know, you need to ask, you know, if you're gonna get married, you should get married in your parish, but if you're gonna get married in another parish, you should go and ask your pastor for the appropriate permission to go and get married somewhere else, you know. So in a sense, that there's this profound sense of belonging to a parish. And for many of us, it is tempting to imagine that parishes have existed all throughout history, since the time of Jesus, you know? I mean, we could ask, to what parish did Jesus go, you know? Or to what parish did the apostles go, or and so on. But as a matter of fact, you know, the idea of community is certainly as ancient as Christianity. It goes back to Christianity transcends Christianity. But the idea of parish as such is very modern, is very contemporary. You know? So we begin properly to speak about parishes as we understand them today only until the 17th, 18th century. That's when we begin to speak of parishes as actual territories, and when they become to be codified, you know, in canon law They are codified in Europe, eventually in the United States, in North America, and then throughout Latin America, the idea of parroquia, which is a Greek term that means people who belong to a particular community, the sense of community. But parishes, as I said, there has never been a standard model of parish life. We have always experimented with parishes. And this is why, if at some point we get anxious that whatever we understand as a parish is changing, if whatever we understand as a parish is evolving, we should not get anxious. Because again, as Catholics, we have constantly been experimenting with models that help us form community. Some of these models throughout history are the following. Missions. Some of the first quote-unquote parishes that we have had throughout the Americas. Some of the first communities that we have seen in Africa or in mission territories, as a matter of fact, have been missions. And missions rarely dealt with territory. Missions were more about the work of evangelization. So missions had centers. Missions have always had centers. So people would, for instance, would be catechized in a particular center. I was sharing with Pablo about how beautiful this center is, for instance, So in the context of a mission, there are centers where people are evangelized, where people receive the sacraments, where people would receive this. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how big the territory is, as long as there is a center. As long as there is a center of faith, where the faith is shared, where it's taught, where it's celebrated, and where it's lived in community. But missions are not the only way of organizing ourselves in community. There is also the concept of transplanted communities, which we have seen, for instance, in the case of Europeans who migrated from different parts of the continent throughout the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. So we have transplanted communities, German Catholics transplanted entire communities into North America and other parts of the world. We have seen the Portuguese and the Spanish transplanting communities. So, and those communities eventually would lead to what were called national parishes. So when French migrants transplanted their communities to Canada or transplanted their communities to the United States, they eventually would provide the foundations of what would become the French parish. And those were communities where people would actually live their faith as if they were living in whatever countries they came from, whatever cultures they came from, and they celebrated their faith. In some cases, actually, some of these communities attempted, as a matter of fact, to establish independent Catholic churches. We saw the case, we have seen the case in North America with Polish Catholics, with German Catholics, who attempted to establish the National German Church or the National Polish Church, And again, around this idea that there is such a sui generis way of being Polish Catholic or German Catholic, that would allow them to exist, without being necessarily in communion with other churches. National parishes would be a model that is more common, has been more common in the North American context, And I'm fascinated, for instance, to go and visit churches throughout, most of my experiences in the United States, just to see, different, communities in St. Louis, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, San Antonio, where we would find, in small places, in small concentrations of Catholics, large number of churches, My family and I, for instance, worship in a small city called Lawrence in the state of Massachusetts. That's where we are engaged in ministry. And what's fascinating is that this city at some point had 25,000 Catholics, and it had 15 Catholic churches. Imagine that. You know, 25,000 Catholics, 15 Catholic churches. Why? Because the Irish established their own church, and the Germans and the French, you know, and Portuguese, and everybody had their own churches. But those cases, you know, in a sense, the proliferation of parishes or national parishes in the U.S. context, you know, is not the standard. That actually did not happen in Latin America. That has not happened in Africa. It is not happening in Asia. No, and so national parishes are one model of organizing life or organizing life. Many of those national parishes already led way to what is called the parish, not just the regular parish. And the Code of Canon Law in 1983, when it was revised, after the revision of the Code of Canon Law, so the idea of national parishes is not supported any longer, you know. So now what we have, in many ways, is the idea of personal parishes that carries a little bit of the element of the national parish, the element of the national parish, but with a different perspective. Now, personal parishes are, according to the Code of Canon Law, are faith communities that serve the specific needs of a particular group of Catholics, okay? It could be linguistic needs, it could be national needs, but it could also be, for instance, disabilities, questions related to disabilities. It could be parishes that focus on people who are the apostolate of the deaf, or people who are blind, or Catholics who are serving, or parishes that are serving travelers, parishes that are serving farm workers. And I believe that the 1983 revision of the canon law, and by entering the question of personal parishes, gave us, in some ways, a richer understanding of parish life that focuses not only on the particularity of needs of the people, but also it invites us to imagine this idea that not all parishes have to be the same. Not all parishes, as a matter of fact, have to operate in the same, according to the same organizational patterns, according to the same pastoral principles. Of course, there are standards, and the same canon law gives us those standards for what a parish should be, but at the practical level, not all parishes should be different. Bishops, in general, are very prudent about the use of and the establishment of personal parishes. So there is not a large proliferation of pastoral parishes. But as I will say later on, what I find fascinating is that the laity actually are forcing the hands of bishops to develop particular parishes and faith communities according to their interests and their own needs. And I'll say more in a minute. So we have also, we're beginning to see also the phenomenon of multicultural parishes. These are faith communities, and you have them here in Canada, we have them in the United States. They are beginning to become more and more popular in Europe, in whatever is left of the parish system in Europe. There are a few of them in Latin America, but the multicultural parishes are parishes that serve, 2, 3, 4, 5 different language groups. Okay, that is complicated. It's not an easy fit, because the biggest challenge for those parishes is not that people speak 5 languages. The biggest challenge is that we don't have trained ministers to work in these multilingual communities, okay? Whether ordained or laid or vowed religious, we do not have. We have not prepared to work in these faith communities. But if you take a look at these different models of organizing the community, missions, transplanted communities, national parishes, personal parishes, multicultural parishes, something that we find interesting is that they have historically, somehow one has followed the other, and yet today they coexist as well. So they haven't died. Those models still coexist. We still have missions, we still have transplanted communities, we still have what would be the equivalent to national parishes, we have personal parishes, we have multicultural parishes. How do we justify all these communities today coexisting and giving us the experience of parish life? I would like to say that in some ways it has a lot of this has to do with the input that the Second Vatican Council gave us, or the thrust that the Second Vatican Council gave us vis-a-vis parish life. Prior to Vatican II, most of the understanding of parish life was associated with the minister of the pastor. You see? It was primarily about the minister of the pastor. So the pastor who is assigned to a community as the head of the community, and then the pastor who determines, the dynamics of parish life, sacramental life, faith formation, the ministry, the social ministries of the church, but everything everything was around the figure of the pastor. Vatican II doesn't do away with that. As a matter of fact, Vatican II continues to affirm that, but Vatican II gives us some pointers to actually expand what the dynamic of parish life can be. And I want to share 3 of them. Let's see. I will come back to this. So the first one is Vatican II in Sacrosanctum Concilium. In Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Vatican II reminds us that the parish represents the worldwide church at the local level. I have already mentioned this earlier. So the parish represents the worldwide church at the local level. And that is an important insight to understand the beauty of the parish, okay? Because parishes, de facto, are diverse communities. Parishes, de facto, are diverse communities, no? One thing is to be a Catholic parish in Edmonton, another one is to be a Catholic parish in Montreal, another one is to be a Catholic parish in Boston, another one is to be a Catholic parish in Mexico City, or in Punjabi, or wherever we come from, okay? So local parishes, de facto, are diverse. And yet, they all manage to represent the universal church and the particularity of the community, okay? And that says a lot, because in some ways that takes us away, that pulls us away from the impulse of, imagining that there is only one way of being parish, that there is only one arrangement that is possible, that there is only one way of worshiping, that there is only one way of structuring the life of the community. In Lumen Gentium, Vatican II reminds us that Christ is present in every parish through word and sacrament. So notice this similar echoing that dynamic, Christ is present in every parish through word and sacrament, okay? And finally, we encounter here in Agentes Divinitus, the formation of the parish is the work of the Holy Spirit, forming communities that are grounded here and there of the people's socio-cultural experience. Okay, that's my wording, however, I'm paraphrasing what the conciliar text says. The formation of the parish is ultimately the work of the Holy Spirit. And in here, what Vatican II is telling us is that we need to be attentive to the pneumatological dimensions of the parish. The Holy Spirit that constantly renews, the Holy Spirit that constantly creates, okay? Forming communities that are grounded in the here and now. And that is another dynamic that Vatican II provides. That parish life reflects context. That context matters when we are forming and constructing communities. So language, culture, social location, politics, ideology, all those dynamics are important when we are building faith communities. No? How the Holy Spirit guides us. That's again the process of discernment. So with those pieces in mind, then we need to begin to imagine. Okay, if the parish is evolving, and particularly with this understanding that the parish is the work of the Holy Spirit, that the parish represents the entire church, and that the parish is a place or a space where we encounter Christ, no? Then we need to start thinking, how is the parish evolving in our day? How is this changing? I want to share with you 5 what I'm going to call sociological assumptions at the heart of parish life, and then share with you, provide with you a sense of how those assumptions are being challenged by phenomena that are inviting us to reimagine parish life in our day. 1, the first assumption of parish life is that the parish presupposes people who have faith and people who practice their faith. Okay? That's the first assumption. It's a community of believers. Okay? It's a community of believers. Have we ever imagined a parish that also reaches out to people who are non-believers? Or people who belong to other religious traditions? By and large, the Catholic world will imagine parish mainly as people who are believers, practicing, and Christian Catholic. That's pretty much, is the self-enclosed understanding of parish life. 2, parishes, according to canon law, are territorial. The bishops, when a diocese is created and a parish is going to be created, it is assigned a specific territory. So we know when you buy a household, when you buy a home, you know to which parish you belong. No, it's easy. You know you belong to this parish, you belong to this parish, you belong to this parish. No? So, 3, parishes are local. No, parishes are always local. 4, parishes, to be parish, in a sense, requires and demands physical contact. The physicality of parish life is always present. And this is very sacramental as well, okay? So we celebrate Mass together, we baptize in a community, we receive the Eucharist in the context of a community. So there is a physicality that actually is required in order to be parish. And finally, there is the assumption of pre-existing small communities, or pre-existing communities that where the parish is actualized and that are brought together in the context of parish life. What are those pre-existing communities? It could be movements, it could be families, it could be prayer groups, it could be associations, confraternities, and so on. So there's an assumption, the existence of the parish, in the existence of the parish, there's an assumption that these small communities fuel what ultimately becomes parish life. Nonetheless, In the last half a century or so, we are witnessing a series of dynamics that actually are challenging this understanding of parish life. No? They are not destroying parish life, but they are being challenged. And the parish certainly does not exist in a vacuum. So the idea that the parish is a space or a territory of, where believers coexist is being challenged by the phenomenon of secularization. Okay? So the fastest growing phenomenon, religious phenomenon in the world, as a matter of fact, but primarily in the Western world, is not the growth of Christianity or the growth of Islam or any other religious tradition. The fastest growing phenomenon is secularization. Okay? So more and more, we are encountering what traditionally were Christian, Catholic families that were united by faith, now somehow wrestling with the fact that the parents may be practicing Catholics, but some of their children have become secularized, humanists, sometimes agnostics, or atheists. No? In the United States, the median age when a child, a Catholic child, stops practicing the faith is 13. Okay? So that actually, secularization is becoming a major phenomenon also in Latin America. Latin America that began the 20th century, or actually the 21st century, as a mostly Catholic nation, have seen major inroads of secularization today. 40% of all Catholics live in Latin America, and now Latin America is wrestling for the first time in 500 years of history with the issue of having a large percentages of people who are secularized. In the United States, it's estimated that 27% of the entire population are secularized, or sometimes people call them non-religiously affiliated, or so, non-religiously affiliated doesn't mean that you are totally secularized or you are an atheist, but there's no religious affiliation. Second major challenge of parish life today is urbanization. And that's something that we need to start considering in our understanding of parish life. No? The idea of parish, as a matter of fact, is an agrarian concept, which was inherited from the medieval feudal system. Okay, somebody distributes the land, so you got the land, and actually one of the last feudal institutions in the entire world that remains to this day is Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church, So the Pope kind of distributes the land, among the bishops, just assigning the responsibilities of pastoral care. And then, the bishops assign that responsibility to the pastors at the local, at the level of the parish. So that's a very agrarian, feudal, medieval approach that we still have. But what we have today is in the context of urbanization, most Western nations, the majority of the population today do not live in rural areas. They live in urban settings. Okay? They live in urban settings. So Latin America, just to give you a sense, in the entire Latin American continent, in the 1960s, about 55% of the entire population lived in rural areas. Today, only 15 to 20% of the Latin American population would live in urban settings. Here you have it in Canada, such a vast nation, and again, most of the population is concentrated still in urban centers. In the United States of America, you have most of the population concentrated on the two coasts, East Coast and West Coast, largely in urban centers. The question is Catholicism prepared to deal with the challenges of urban life, okay, of urban life? Are we ready to do that? Are we nimble to do that? No, nimble enough. Because, for instance, if you think about the way we build churches, the way we build parishes, no? So we tend to build these large, heavy churches, no? Very beautiful buildings, but they are not nimble enough to move and change. That's one of the reasons, for instance, why evangelicalism and Pentecostalism have made so many inroads in Africa, in Latin America, and now in North America. No, major inroads, because a small church, a small church that is evangelical, say, with 200 or 300 members, they can move spatially. They can move from neighborhood to another neighborhood. They can change pastors quickly. They can change from one corner of the neighborhood to another. They can adapt, they can split, and they can do many things. Roman Catholics don't have that ability with our parishes. Once you build a $20 million parish or a $15 million parish that is this huge, you just can't move it from one corner to the next. And you don't want to move it after such a major investment. No, you don't want to close that community and so on. So urban life comes with its own demands, and that is challenging. The idea of the parish being local. 3, globalization. Major dynamics that are transforming Catholicism these days. Catholicism in terms of the flows of migration, globalization, as we move and become aware of different dynamics and the relationships that are emerging, as we become aware of what's happening in other parts of the world. The rise of the digital world, okay? Very important dynamic that we are experiencing today. So this is particularly among youth and young adults. There are more youth and young adults right now talking and speaking about religion and learning their faith, and learning about their faith in digital spaces than in actual parishes. Okay? So the space that actually the parish owned for centuries in terms of sharing the faith, discussing the faith, and participating in the context of faith community has quickly, in less than 3 decades, moved to the digital world. Young people today are being called the digital natives. Digital natives. People who are born, using a phone, using a tablet, using a computer, using the internet, and so on. However, they are being guided, or they are being guided by a church of leaders who were trained to do ministry and to do formation in an entirely different world. Some of you might have been trained in your ministry or for ministry in your theology, your pastoral skills in the 1960s or 70s, when still there were no computers available for all of us in our pockets today, as we have with the smartphones. And finally, we have the slow breakdown of of communal life practices, particularly the small community. We are witnessing, and sociologist, Harvard University's sociologist Robert Putnam has helped us to understand this a little bit better, But there's a breakdown. There's a breakdown when it comes down to communal life practices. We are not sharing with others. Small communities. Community organizing is in crisis in many places. Family life is in crisis in many places. Small groups that used to be confraternities, that used to give life to many parishes, prayer groups, Bible groups that used to give life to many parishes are dwindling in many of our communities. So the small community is breaking apart. No? Now, we can sit down and cry about it, or we can ask ourselves, where are people transitioning to? Where are people transitioning to? No, because still, the number of Catholics continues to grow everywhere. The number of Catholics continues to grow. But the question is, we are witnessing a major transition. And what I can tell you, friends, is that the transition is not being to the traditional parish. The transition is not being to the traditional parish. So where are people transitioning? Where is it that, how are they being parish today? So if we were to think about the Catholic parish today, of today and tomorrow, then we find some overarching dynamics that we need to use as lenses to understand what parish life is becoming today. One, change. So parish life, this is not news to any of us, but parish life is changing. We know that for a fact. I've given you a series of dynamics, realities, frameworks to understand this. Parish life is changing. But one of the perhaps most interesting aspects about parish related to these changes of parish life is the question of choice. Today, most Catholics in the Western world would not say, I belong to this parish because I was born there. I still meet Catholics, and they tend to be usually in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, who tell me, I was born in this parish, I was baptized in this parish, I was married in this parish, I made all my sacraments, and I hope to be buried in this parish. Okay? Which is fascinating. Very few people would say something similar today. Very few people would say something, because there are many dynamics. There is mobility, there is all the dynamics of globalization and the transformation of expectations of parish life and so on. But perhaps one of the most important aspects is that people today would speak about choosing their parish. Choosing their parish. So people would rather say, I have chosen X or Y parish. Once again, my context primarily comes from what I have studied, in the U.S. context. But right now, one of the dynamics is that, for instance, the United States of America is more divided today than it ever was in terms of race, ethnicity, ideology, than it was during what's called the Jim Crow period, or the Jim Crow period. And Catholics actually have followed suit in terms of this fragmentation. So it is, we're beginning to see a rise of Catholic parishes that self-identify as parishes that are pro-social justice, or pro-life, or pro-immigrant, or anti-immigrant, parishes that are pro-young people, or pro-youth ministry, parishes that do not want to do youth ministry. We are beginning to see parishes that actually are doing away with religious education programs. They don't want to do religious education programs. So it's this whole idea, this new idea that you choose the type of parish where you want to go and who you want to be. Many Catholics choose the parish based on who is preaching. So whether I agree with the preacher or I don't agree with the preacher, I follow this particular preacher. So choice is becoming a major dynamic. And the third lens that we need to start asking is relevance. For whom is the parish relevant today? For whom is the parish relevant today? Is the parish relevant for the family? Is the parish relevant for the immigrant? Is the parish relevant for the priests who are in training and eventually will be running these parishes? And at what point do we assess, the levels of relevance of those communities? So if parish ministry is in transition because of in light of the dynamics that I've been sharing, then we are beginning to see, and this is perhaps the evolution that I want to propose, or the framework that I want to provide to imagine the type of parishes that will be emerging in the following decades. One, these are parishes that are going to have to contend with religious pluralism, including the embrace of people who do not have faith, yet are raising children, are married to people who have faith and who are Catholic or practicing Catholics, okay? How many of us, for instance, would have ministries in our parishes to serve people who do not believe in God? Members of the families of the people who are in this. How many of us would welcome members of the family of our Catholic parishioners who happen to be Muslim or Buddhist or who are Jewish and so on? So we know about the existence of those families, and as we move forward, we're going to have more and more and more of these communities, and more of these communities. Urban ministry, going back to urban ministry, I had an opportunity to go to a continental conference organized by the bishops of Selam in Mexico City about urban ministry. If you ever want to actually look at some of the forerunners in the question of urban ministry from a theological and pastoral perspective, Mexico is ahead of the game. It has excellent theologians and pastoralists addressing this question. So I just wanted to share one thing about urban ministry. When I went to the conference, we were invited to go into a neighborhood, a neighborhood that a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the bishop declared this neighborhood a parish, the traditional parish. So these are the boundaries of the parish, these are the blocks, and this is what the neighborhood is going to be. This is a fascinating neighborhood, because this neighborhood has the ability, regularly to change boundaries. It changes boundaries by people building houses and sometimes tearing houses down. But they do it quickly. They do it, or we're talking about in spaces of 2 or 3 years. The neighborhood can change. The boundaries of the neighborhood can change. So also it is a neighborhood that is constantly shaped by mobility. The parish that you have today, the members of your parish, 6 months later, 80% of them will not be around. Okay? How do you build a parish community based on that realities? My parish is an urban parish, small urban parish. It has about, not that small, it has about 7,000 families, okay? So it's a huge parish. And this parish is a community that, we have done this exercise with, my wife is the director of Hispanic ministry for the parish, and we have done this experiment. We have taken pictures of the community, of the people who come to Mass on a regular basis. We take pictures, and then the following year, around the same time, we take pictures again. Most of the people entirely different. So how do we build parishes? So gone are the days when people actually, would stay in the same parish for a long time. So when the Code of Canon Law tells us a stable community, okay, it might be stable vis-a-vis a pastor, it might be stable vis-a-vis the other side of the diocese, but it most likely is not stable in terms of the dynamics of happening here, that we're observing. So this urban ministry is challenging us to reimagine parish life. Can we imagine parishes that actually travel with people? rather than expecting that people would come to a particular set of parishes? Can we imagine parishes that exist only for a while? Because after a certain number of years, maybe the boundaries of the space have changed. The demands of the space have changed. These are the questions, for instance, that are being asked in the Bronx right now, these days, you know. These are theologians and pastoralists, Catholic, evangelical, and others, who are asking about the idea of parishes with a sense of mobility. Parishes that, parishes that move with the people, or parishes that exist temporarily. But even more fascinating is, and again, Catholics are we always like, stay behind on these conversations, but evangelicals, evangelical Christians and leaders are doing much better. Parishes that are small in size, that's going back. In the urban setting, imagine these mammoth parishes that we normally have, super communities, like the 7,000 family parishes. Well, those parishes cannot survive the changes of urban life as we are witnessing today. So as the parish continues to change, going back to the mobility flows, so parishes that are constantly, that are being transformed, that are being formed and transformed on a regular basis. Parishes that are transformed by migrant communities. A parish, for instance, I know a diocese in the state of Ohio in the U.S., a diocese that in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, was mostly, this parish was about 90% white, Euro-American, English-speaking, most of the parishioners in the diocese. 20 years later, 50% of the Catholics in this diocese, are Hispanic, primarily Spanish-speaking Catholics. In just 2 decades, okay, shifted quickly. What were the reasons? Jobs, opportunities, the aging of the white population, English-speaking population, so younger immigrants and so on. But that's not the only parish. We find them everywhere in the large urban centers, as patterns of migration, internal migration, global migration, continue to accelerate at every single time. And right now, there are about 300 million people crossing boundaries one way or another. Some of them looking for new homes, some of them going for new jobs, some of them exiled, some of them pushed by natural dynamics. So 300 million people are on the move. You can count on a large number of those millions being Roman Catholic who are searching for these parishes. And sometimes the parishes where they arrive in a temporary way, In the Philippines, for instance, I recently met a bishop from the Philippines who is a bishop in Indonesia. And he's a bishop in this island, and I unfortunately forgot the name of the island, but he's the bishop on this island in which people constantly migrate from the Philippines. They come to live on this island, and every year, 80% of them go somewhere else. So what he was asking, when I was having a conversation with him, he asked me, what does it mean to be a bishop of a diocese where your flock only exists for 1 year, only stays for 1 year? What does it mean to be a pastor of a community in which your flock, stays for 1 or 2 or 3 years? So those are the questions that now reshape our understanding of family, of parish life. Multiple forms of belonging to parish life. So right now, certainly the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the use of virtual resources and virtual dynamics. So we have the quote-unquote Catholic digital parishes. Okay, it's a big phenomenon. Big phenomenon. In the Archdiocese of Boston, where I live, there is one parish, St. Cecilia's Parish, which is famous nation and worldwide. You know, they hired an entire team to do digital ministry. So they got tens of thousands of parishioners attending Mass every Sunday online, and a few hundred going to Mass the regular way as they go in a parish. No? But the question is, what does it mean to be a Eucharistic community in that particular parish? What does it mean to share the faith? How do we, are the people who are attending Mass virtually, are they real members of the parish? So those are the questions that are beginning to emerge, no, right now, because it's not only St. Cecilia's, it's also happening in campus ministry communities. It's also happening among young adults who are working and searching for jobs. It is happening among immigrants who, as a matter of fact, do not want to break ties with the parishes in the countries where they come from. In the old days, when you migrated to the United States, that was it. You know, you cut ties with family, with parishes, with friends and neighborhoods. Today, you have WhatsApp, you have Zoom, and you've got a myriad of resources that keep you connected. But the question is, what does it mean to be parish in those particular contexts? How many of you seminarians are receiving, for instance, training and classes to work with these communities? Should we always revert to the traditional model, which is the easiest way that we can do and the safest way in many ways to name parish? So, and finally, in Latin America, they have been experimenting, and actually this is the CELAM has embraced a model of parishes in parish ministry that is called Comunidad de Comunidades, community of communities. And it's a fascinating model, you know, it's a fascinating model in which, you know, the assumption is very simple, it's very straightforward, and it's an expression of a theology of communion, okay? So the concept is simple. The parish, there is no such a thing as the parish as one community. That's the premise. No? Because that's the model that we normally have. That's the model that we normally have. There is one parish, therefore one community, and we tend to homogenize pastoral activity in that community. In the model of communities, the bishops of Latin America have been experimenting with the idea that, as a matter of fact, the parish ultimately is a space or a network of communities. It is a network of communities, and these communities are diverse and sui generis. What could those communities be? Those communities could be, for instance, chapels in rural settings or urban settings. No? And we've been, for instance, in Mexico, going back to Pastoral Urbana or urban ministry in Mexico, as a matter of fact, that's one of the models that is being implemented, you know, a multiplicity of chapels in different places, different urban spaces. Rather than building large churches, they are building small chapels in neighborhoods, in malls. They are building chapels in colleges and so on, at the service of the entire community. Prayer groups, apostolic movements. In Latin America, apostolic movements are, and actually we begin to see this, we know this in Europe, and it's also happening in the United States. No, apostolic movements, Catholic Charismatic Renewal, Focolare, Neo-Catechumenal Way, Cursillo, and all these movements are reinvigorating Catholic life, but they are not doing it necessarily as members of the parish or within a parish, but they are doing it outside of the parish context. In North America, these apostolic movements still are connected to the parish because the parish system still strong. But in Europe, it has collapsed in many countries. In many European countries, the parish system has collapsed, and it is these movements that are sustaining the life of the people. So community of communities is a fascinating model that I see is emerging, as an alternative, not to replace the traditional understanding of parish, but to enrich it. The last example that I will give about community of communities is about this parish in Dallas, Texas, in Matthews Parish in Dallas, Texas. A young man who was invited to do youth ministry. No, he was hired to do youth ministry, and he received the charge of doing youth ministry as is traditionally done. You would do youth ministry, you will separate adolescents from young adults, and then you will do religious education with a few others. This young man had experience of the community or communities model in Latin America, and he asked for permission to implement it in his parish. So on average, in the United States of America, a youth group has about 20 to 25 members on a youth group, okay? This young man, in less than a year, developed a model of youth ministry that had more than 800 young people engaged. And a lot of people ask him, how is it possible to manage? How is it possible to manage a youth group with 800 people? And he said, that's the wrong question. It's not about one youth group with 800 people. It's about one youth ministry model that embraces 800 people in a model of communities. How did he do it? He started asking young people, what do you like to do? Some young people said, we like to do Eucharistic adoration. So he gathered a bunch of young people who wanted to do Eucharistic adoration and formed a group who did that. Then some young kids wanted to do outreach to the homeless. Others wanted to do pro-life activities. Some of them wanted to do the Rosary and Marian activities. Others wanted to read the Bible. Others wanted to do service trips. Others wanted to do prayer, charismatic renewal prayer groups, and so on. So he began to build these small communities, and his ministry was not about homogenizing. His ministry was about creating a network, and he and his colleagues were ministering by providing support to the network. That's a different way of doing parish. Okay? So I think that, what I wanted to do with this presentation, friends, is not here to just simply give you, this is the magic bullet to save parishes or to do parishes better or to come up with a different model of parish. I think that what I wanted to do with this presentation in many ways is provide a set of guidelines looking at how the sociological dynamics of today are reframing the experience of being parish. What do I recommend in order to do that? What's the impact of that transformation? And with that, I promise that I will finish. I think that I want to use two perspectives. One, pastoral planning, okay? I think that gone are the days, considering how fast the world is moving, considering the dynamics that are shaping parish life experience, we cannot do pastoral planning for 10 years any longer. We cannot do pastoral planning for 20 years, or even for 7 years, 5 years. We need to start engaging in short-term pastoral planning. Pastoral plans of 2 years, 3 years, that are constantly revised, and that will help us address the reality of those who are coming to our communities. On average, a young person is engaged in a youth ministry program for 3 years, on average. 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And that's actually universal. That's not only US. There are some sociologists that I have consulted in Latin America. It's exactly the same thing. You get these young people for 3 years. So when you do youth ministry, I have never understood a 10-year plan for youth ministry, right? It doesn't make much sense, no? But if you do a 3-year plan ministry, you need to figure out, once you welcome the 12-year-old in your parish, what could you do with this 12-year-old for the next 3 years? And that would be more effective parish ministry. But that would also be parish ministry with families and other groups. We need ministerial leadership that is training for parishes in flux. We need priests that are prepared to engage these communities. We need lay pastoral leaders who are engaged in doing this. Very rarely, our ministerial programs, and I teach in a theology that trains both future priests and lay people, and we very rarely have courses on parish life, and particularly parish life that addresses the question of being communities in flux. And finally, intentional coexistence of multiple communities within the parish, within the one parish community. So as we move forward, we need to become more attentive. And I want to push a little bit on this model of communities, because I believe that that's a model that actually existed in antiquity, but for some reason we moved away, and with the impulse of homogenizing and centralizing. So I feel that we need to start moving into a model that is more dynamic, in which the pastor or the pastoral leader, rather than being the one who centralizes everything, is the one who coordinates and accompanies the network. And the other lens would be religious education and faith formation. What do we do in this case? We need to prepare Catholics to read the signs of the times. We need to prepare people who are more discerning, And we got the process of synodality that is helping us all to do that in a much better way. But if people don't understand what is affecting parish life, they will not know how to respond to the changes and dynamics that are transforming their communities. And finally, preparing people to discern and choose being parish, okay? I don't think that the question of choice is gonna go away. People today are not simply, they just don't simply embrace the idea that they belong to a parish. People want to choose a parish, and we need to prepare them to do that. Thank you very much.
We'll have 10-15 minutes of Q&A, so feel free to raise your hand and if you'd like to
Well, if you have any comments, questions, reactions, please.
Yes, right, this is the last bullet.
The last bullet, preparing to discern and choose being parish. Yes?
So I am curious, when you're doing at Boston College, have you changed anything in your MDiv program? Have you switched up some classes?
We have talked about many of these dynamics, and I teach a course that is called Ministry in a Diverse Church, in which much of this is integrated, Because, we have discussed the possibility of teaching a course on community life, or faith communities. That hasn't materialized. But for instance, St. John's University in Collegeville, they implemented a course like that a number of years ago. And my sense is that what you need is an army of theologians interested in this topic, you see? That's what we do not have. We continue to invest in the classical approaches to teaching ecclesiology, which is great, and we need to do that. But when it comes down to grassroots realities, we are doing very little about that. And it's usually through workshops that a lot of this gets done, but not, unfortunately, still haven't done it in more courses should have. We should have an ecclesiology of the parish, for instance. No? Thank you. Yes?
So in the average parish, you would have, like, right now, we have, what we call various ministries.
Yep.
So like, there's the Knights of Columbus, Handmaids of the Lord, Legion of Mary, Catholic Women's League,
Yeah.
like that pretty much exists in most parishes, right? So would you call them the communities? Is that what you?
The key would be how are they connecting with each other? Because most parishes will have a large variety of groups, but they work in silos, you see? So if you're a Knight of Columbus, then you would not join the Charismatic Renewal group or the Other Sodality or whatever the other groups are, you know? So how do we imagine, you know, networks of dialogue and collaboration? How do we, you know, bring together these groups to plan different ministries together as well in different activities? So yes, I mean, we already have many of these, but without that element of networking, intentional networking, we will just be a group of fragmented communities. There was another hand right there. Yes.
I'm just wondering, in what you've seen in places that have adopted this model of community of communities, how do they go about celebration of liturgical sacramental worship together? Is it moving chapel by chapel, confession here, confession there, mass here, mass there, or is there kind of at any moment a large group celebration?
Usually it's unified. And so the liturgy remains always a unifying factor. You know? So, I mean, for instance, I would never advocate for having 10 different Easter, you know, celebrations in one church. You know, but what happens is, you know, can you have a youth mass at some point with young people? Can you have a group of people celebrating, for instance, the neo-catechumenal way in some of the parishes where they are present, they have permission to celebrate the sacraments in a particular way according to the church. So all of that is possible as long as it doesn't fragment, but what I have seen in most places is Mass tends to be the unifying, the celebration of the sacraments tends to be the unifying factor for the community. And it makes sense. It makes sense that the Mass, despite the diversity, worship should bring us together.
So despite the title, you actually didn't talk a lot about Vatican II. So do you actually see the council as a big mover of some of these changes, or was it merely the other cultural changes of the last many decades and the 60s that led to a lot of these changes in parish life and such?
Vatican II, you see, thank you for asking the question. This is an honest question, Vatican II in many ways was a catalyst of a set of movements that were already in place, paving the way for what we are seeing today. The liturgical movement, catechetical movements, the laity, laity movements, and so on. So it's not that it's not that Vatican II kind of gave us marching orders on this is how the parish is going to be. It's going to be. But the fact that Vatican II would encourage the laity to be more proactive about how they live their faith in the world and also participate in the life of the church opened the doors for how people would reimagine themselves being part of a faith community. That I would say. The fact that Vatican II sends us into this way of experimenting the liturgy in the vernacular by paying attention to the cultural dynamics of faith communities immediately changes how people do worship in the context of the parish. So I would say that so there's not a document in Vatican II that says this is what the parish does and should be doing, but we get glimpses of that, and I would extrapolate, so maybe much of my talk is imbued, but what happened at Vatican II But yeah, the council per se will not give us, marching orders on a particular model of parish life. Thank you. That's an excellent question. We're other than to it, yes.
It seems like the big problem with everything you talked about primarily consists of globalization. The idea that like we can no longer have like the one church we grew up and we were baptized in. It seems like a consequence of globalization. You brought up the Filipino bishop. Like, we wouldn't have this problem if globalization was this huge problem, was this thing. I think ultimately these problems never existed before globalization came to be. You know, like there's something beautiful about seeing the Annunciation of Mary from like a Japanese perspective. What's wrong with seeing that in Japan? You know, there are many countries and many places in the world that celebrate the Catholic faith in their own unique and beautiful way. Why must we have this like essentially this blob and this like this slush of just one Catholic church faith, you know, and everybody else is so unique and so beautiful.
I think that I get to some extent, but can you repeat the comment on globalization? Do you think that globalization is a good dynamic, is a negative dynamic?
I think it's what's led to many problems in your presentation and many problems in the world of Catholic faith, which you speak of.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that personally, I'm more positive towards globalization. I just feel that it's a factor of reality today. I mean, we just can't control it. We can't control it. It is happening, it is happening. And the more airplanes we have, and the more digital media we have, and the more access to resources, and the more we depend on one another, as we do today, globalization will continue to be a marker of our existence. Now, as for people moving and so on, that's been a pattern throughout history. As long as we have recorded history, we have had large patterns of migration, people moving from one place to another, influencing one another. And just think about, the times of colonization, when the Spanish, the French, the Spanish and many others moved, from one continent to the other, bringing their own traditions. So I think that should we be more critical of globalization and globalization forces, particularly those that destroy or that threaten the local? Yes, I would agree with that. But I feel that globalization is something that is almost beyond our minds. And frankly, Catholicism, the Catholic Church, has been one of the most efficient, and successful transnational organizations since the beginning.
I think you mean transnational organization while respecting the boundaries and the uniqueness of countries.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Maybe a question on sort of you talked about, which is a really good thing, that there's some parishes that have thousands of people enrolled online, which is good, right? Because that means the gospel message is getting out. And so in one sense, it's good to have people joining on that medium. But do you think there's a risk to that, of the parish being anti-incarnational or losing that in-person aspect? And I guess, what are sort of some of the potential advantages with that digitalization, but also are there negatives to be concerned about? And is it really a parish if you don't have that same, in-person factor?
Yeah. Our Catholic sacramental theology, is, it's beautiful and complex at the same time. It requires, you cannot baptize a kid without water. No, we cannot use digital water to baptize a kid. But it would surprise me that somebody would attempt to do that, there's some sound reasons why the Catholic Church do not allow confessions over the internet or the phone, or by text message, So there's this element, this profound element of sacramental life, that is both physical and metaphysical. And what the digital world is doing right now these days is it's pushing boundaries. It's pushing boundaries because we have Catholics who never go to Mass in a physical space, yet they join mass, and or they join worship through the digital era. So we're still wrestling with that. I mean, I don't know, maybe I was trained and I grew up in a different type, in a type of Catholicism that still, privileges that physical context. Is the Catholic Church will develop? Will the Catholic Church eventually develop a model of ministry or a model of participation, sacramental participation in the digital world? I don't know. I don't see it right now happening. But again, we'll see where the Holy Spirit takes us. But so far, many of these experiences push, rather than threats, I see them as pushing the boundaries. And that's where theologians and pastoralists need to be talking about, I mean, because one of the challenges at this parish that I was mentioning, you got a few hundred people going to mass physically, and thousands joining the same mass digitally. All you need to do is simply shut the computer off, and then you get rid of 10,000 or 20,000 people who are joining the mass. Is that the right approach? Is that what we want to do? How can we ensure that these people eventually get connected to other communities and so on? So that's where the thinking is. Thank you. That's a good question. It's good to keep thinking about it. Yes.
I would like to know some of the conversations you've had with some of the priests down in, let's say, Mexico that are implementing some of these new methods that you were talking about, and how much of a success it has been for them. And primarily like the concern of delegation in those new methods. Because I think there, maybe in our neck of the woods, that there might be a concern of a lacking theological formation in the laity for priests, upcoming priests, to give, right, to give that responsibility to the laity. And so yeah, I'm just wondering how can priests and future priests delegate wisely in order to not only form the laity to be leaders amongst themselves, but also to remain that unit of the parish.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because at the end of the day, what I would say is behind your question and grounding your question is to what extent do we understand that we are part of the same ministry? You see, so this is not about the priests moving in one direction and the laity, or in these large urban settings, or doing these different models of parish life, doing their own thing without the priest. So how do we sustain communion? How do we sustain the work of the church's evangelization while at the same time allow for creativity? And I haven't had these conversations with the people that I have spoken in Mexico or even in the United States who are engaged in the urban ministry per se. But I can tell you something that has emerged in some of the conversations is that they are investing significantly in the theological training of the people that are, of the lay people that are helping them, There used to be a time when the Catholic Church would rely easily on vowed religious women and men to do this kind of work. So they did well, and the sisters would go through intensive programs for formation, and they did well. Well, today we don't have those armies of sisters and brothers and vowed religious ordained priests who were doing that kind of work. So we have to rely on the laity. But we have to also be honest and recognize that we don't invest as much as we should in those lay people. In some of the best models that I have seen is that there are dioceses, as a matter of fact, that invest significantly in lay ecclesial ministry, and they are successful because the laity are not competing with the clergy for resources. They are actually benefiting from those resources, and they all grow together. But it has to be intentional. It has to be intentional. If lay leaders receive subpar formation, you're gonna have subpar collaborators. That's as simple as that, So we need to start ensuring that we got associates, that we got directors of religious education, directors of formation that are well trained, and at some point we need to develop urban ministry programs, that will prepare these people to collaborate with the priest. In some of the parts of Mexico that I was mentioning, Mexico City, one of the challenges is that there is one priest for 30,000 Catholics, So the priest can't be anywhere. So at some point, the priests will have to form as much as they can and trust in the Holy Spirit. At some point we have to trust the laity to do their work, And in most cases, people are very faithful. I mean, have there been excesses, Yeah, you bet, it's always excesses. We're human. But in general, they tend to be, you need to rely as a future pastor. At some point, you just have to make sure. In fact, there was something that I'm teaching in an institution that prepares priests and lay people to work together in the work of evangelization. I always recommend to the future priests, invest as much as you can in the formation of the laity, and you will be a better pastor. A good pastor is not the one who does it all. A good pastor is the one who does well what he needs to do well. Thank you.
So, I guess just my one question here. We're talking a lot about urban settings, urban. How does all this apply to the rural? Because I'm thinking there's probably a lot of us who are, there's a bunch from the cities, but there's also a few of us from smaller, geographically large dioceses with very small communities, limited resources. How does all this tie into, I guess, our ministry for them?
To be honest with you, see, that's an area that I do not have much of expertise. And so I just want to be frank with you. I would say that the principles remain the same. I mean, even if people are receiving, are worshiping in faith communities that are mostly rural, they're still being influenced by secularism. They're still influenced by mobility. They're still influenced by the different dynamics that I was mentioning in the presentation. So I would say that the principles remain the same, communities of communities and so on. But I'm pretty sure that there are nuances that need to be identified, and maybe that could be the next lecture. Someone who has the expertise on rural ministry. But thank you for the question. I think that we just very good.
Thank you, Dr. Ospino, for your time with us this evening. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, this snowy evening. I wish you a wonderful weekend, and we'll put up the schedule for the Muso lecture in the fall closer to September. So in the meantime, enjoy, have a nice evening, and we'll see you next time.